If someone had told me 6 months ago that the loudest, most disruptive human being I had ever met would become the quiet center of my world, I would have laughed. Or, more likely, I would have shrunk into my sweater and avoided eye contact until they went away. Avoidance was my primary skill. It was the foundation upon which I had built my quiet, orderly, and profoundly lonely life. My apartment was my sanctuary. A third-floor walk-up with decent light and walls thick enough to muffle most of the city's endless symphony. I was a freelance graphic designer, which was a polite way of saying I spent 23 hours a day in the same 60-square-foot space, communicating with the outside world through emails and project management software. My routine was a fortress. Coffee at 7. Work until noon. A silent lunch of something predictable. More work. Dinner. The blue glow of a screen until my eyes burned. Sleep. Repeat. It was safe. It was sterile. It was a life lived behind glass. Then my landlord, a man whose entire personality was contained in his stained mustard yellow ties, informed me of a rent hike so astronomical it felt like a personal attack. The options were bleak: move to a shoebox in a neighborhood with a higher-than-average stabbing rate, or get a roommate. I chose the lesser of two evils. I chose the devil I didn't know. Julian was that devil. He answered the ad with a one-sentence email: "Is the room still available?" No pleasantries. No biographical details. Just a question, blunt as a hammer. When he came to see the place, he didn't so much enter a room as conquer it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to suck all the air out of my carefully curated space. He moved with a heavy-footed confidence that made the floorboards groan in protest. He was a contractor, he explained, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. He worked long hours. He was quiet. He was a liar. Not about the long hours, but about the quiet. Julian was constitutionally incapable of silence. It wasn't that he talked much; in fact, in those first few weeks, we barely exchanged a dozen words. It was the noise of his existence. The thud of his steel-toed boots on the hardwood floor at 5 in the morning. The clatter of tools in his bag. The way he closed kitchen cabinets with the force of a controlled demolition. He filled my sanctuary with sound, with energy, with a raw, physical reality that my digital life had no defense against. I began to resent him in 1,000 small ways. I resented the way his work-dusted jeans, slung over the back of a dining chair, seemed to mock my own neatly folded laundry. I resented the smell of sawdust and sweat that clung to him, a scent so aggressively masculine it felt like an invasion. He was a creature of the physical world, all muscle and force and tangible reality. I was a ghost in the machine, a collection of pixels and anxieties. We were two different species forced to share a habitat, and I was the one cowering in the undergrowth. Our interactions were transactions. "Rent's due," I'd murmur, my eyes fixed on the scuffed floorboards between us. On the counter, he'd grunt, not looking up from lacing his boots. We orbited each other like two moons bound to the same planet by a grim financial gravity, never touching, never acknowledging the other's pull. He was a physical fact I had to navigate, a large, solid object in my path. I observed him from a distance, the way a field mouse might watch a hawk circling overhead. I noticed the network of fine white scars on his forearms, the permanent smudge of grime under his fingernails, the deep lines of exhaustion that were sometimes carved around his eyes when he came home late. I catalogued these details from my safe observational perch, never daring to get closer. The distance was the point. The distance was the only thing that kept my fragile peace intact. Then the world, or at least the world contained within our pre-war apartment building, decided my peace was overrated. It started with a drip. A faint, rhythmic plink-plink-plink from the living room ceiling. I ignored it, because that's what I did with problems. I pretended they weren't there. But the drip had other plans. It grew into a steady trickle, then a sag in the plaster, and finally, a catastrophic burst that unleashed a foul-smelling torrent of ancient water directly onto my workspace. My desk, my tablet, my carefully organized life, all swamped in a tide of rust-colored filth. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. My heart became a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. I stood there, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the disaster, the disruption. My fortress had been breached. And then Julian was there. He must have just gotten home. He took one look at the gushing ceiling, at my pale, frozen face, and moved. There was no hesitation. He was a blur of decisive action. He was on the phone to the building super, his voice a low, commanding bark that got immediate results. He was at the main shut-off valve in the basement, a place I didn't even know existed. He returned with a collection of buckets and a grim certainty that was, in that moment, the most reassuring thing I had ever witnessed. "It's the main riser," he said, his voice cutting through my internal static. "Gonna be off for a few days, at least." He didn't look at me with pity. He just stated the fact. He assessed the damage to my desk with a professional eye, his big hands hovering over the waterlogged wood. "This is particle board. It's shot. Everything on it okay." I could only manage a weak nod, my throat tight with unshed tears of frustration. My routine was dead. My sanctuary was a swamp. For the next 3 days, we were forced into a kind of battlefield camaraderie. The apartment was a disaster zone, and he was the field commander. He knew how to talk to the emergency plumbers. He knew our rights as tenants. He rigged a temporary water system using giant jugs he bought from a hardware store, hefting them up the 3 flights of stairs as if they were nothing. I was useless. A spectator in my own home. My only contribution was to make coffee, a task that felt laughably inadequate. I watched him, really watched him, for the first time. Not as an annoyance, not as a disruption, but as a person. I watched the focused intensity in his eyes as he argued with the landlord on the phone. I saw the corded muscles in his neck and shoulders as he moved my ruined desk out to the curb. There was a competence to him, a grounding in the physical world that I found myself envying. He didn't panic. He just did what needed to be done. On the 3rd day, the plumbers were gone and a fragile, damp silence had descended. The hole in the ceiling was a gaping wound. I was trying to salvage what I could from my equipment when Julian came into the room with a new desk, still in a flat-pack box. "Found it on sale," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "It's real wood. Won't fall apart if it gets wet." I was stunned into silence. It was a gesture of such unexpected, unadorned kindness that I didn't know how to process it. "You didn't have to do that," I finally managed to say. He just shrugged, a movement that rippled through his broad shoulders. "Easier than watching you work on the floor." He started unpacking the box, and I, shaking myself from my stupor, moved to help him. We spent the next hour in a mostly silent dance of assembling furniture. He read the cryptic instructions, and I handed him screws and Allen keys. The space between us, once a vast, cold expanse, had shrunk to the size of a single piece of Swedish furniture. We had to lift the heavy desktop onto the frame together. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. We counted to 3 and hoisted it up. As we maneuvered it into place, my hand slipped, brushing against his. It wasn't a glance. It was a solid, 5-second connection. The rough, calloused skin of his palm against the back of my hand. A jolt, pure and white-hot, shot up my arm. It was like touching a live wire. Every nerve ending in my body screamed to attention. My breath hitched in my throat. His skin was warm, a stark contrast to my own perpetually cold fingers. The sensation was so potent, so overwhelming, that for a moment I forgot what we were doing. The desktop wobbled. "Whoa, got it." His voice was steady, but when I dared to look at him, his gaze was fixed on our hands. His dark eyes, usually so guarded, seemed to hold a flicker of something I couldn't name. Surprise? Or something else? He didn't pull away. Neither did I. The moment stretched, thin and taut, vibrating with an unspoken energy. Then it was over. We settled the desktop into place, and the contact was broken. But the ghost of his touch remained, a brand on my skin. My mind, my overthinking, traitorous mind, replayed the moment on a loop for the rest of the day. The texture of his calluses. The surprising heat. The way my entire body had responded with a resounding, terrified yes. I had spent months building a wall between us, and in 5 seconds, an accidental touch had blown a hole right through it. The dynamic shifted after that. It was subtle, a change in the atmospheric pressure of the apartment. The silence between us was no longer empty, it was charged. We started to talk, a little. He'd ask about my work, and I'd ask about his. I learned he was rebuilding a vintage motorcycle in a rented garage space. I told him about a client who wanted a logo that was both minimalist and baroque, and he actually laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that was surprisingly pleasant. A week later, the power balance in our little ecosystem was upended completely. He came home from work early, moving slowly, his face a mask of pale, tight-lipped pain. He was leaning heavily on the doorframe, his left foot shod only in a sock. "What happened?" I asked, my own anxiety spiking in sympathy. "Idiot dropped a stack of drywall," he grated out, his voice strained. "Caught my ankle." He looked lost. This man of action, of physical certainty, was suddenly grounded, vulnerable. The confidence was gone, replaced by a frustration so palpable it was practically a third person in the room. He was a force of nature that had been forcibly becalmed. And I, the quiet, indoor creature, was suddenly the one who knew what to do. My world was small, but I was competent within it. "Sit down," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I'll get you some ice." For the next few days, our roles were reversed. I was the caregiver. I brought him ice packs and propped his swollen ankle on pillows. I made him food, simple things, but he ate them with a gratitude that felt profound. I navigated the pharmacy for painkillers and compression bandages. He hated it. I could see the restless energy thrumming under his skin, his frustration at being immobile. He would sit on the couch, staring at the television without seeing it, his jaw tight. "This is driving me insane," he said one afternoon, throwing the remote onto the cushions. "I'm not built for sitting still." "You need to let it heal," I said, handing him a glass of water. He looked at me then, his gaze direct and intense. "Thanks, Leo," he said, his voice quiet. "For all this." "It's nothing," I deflected, my usual retreat into self-deprecation. "No, it's not," he held my gaze. "I'm not good at this. Asking for help. Relying on people." It was a crack in the facade. A glimpse of the men behind the wall of competence and physical strength. He was lonely. I could see it now, clear as day. His self-sufficiency was a shield, just as my quiet routine was mine. We were both just hiding, in different ways. In that moment, he wasn't the loud, imposing stranger anymore. He was just Julian. A man with a sprained ankle who was bad at being still. And my heart, that stupid, traitorous organ, gave a painful lurch of something that felt terrifyingly like affection. The city-wide blackout came on a Thursday night in late autumn. The sky had been a bruised purple all day, pregnant with a storm that finally broke with a deafening crack of thunder. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the entire neighborhood into a sudden, profound darkness and silence. The hum of the refrigerator, the buzz of my computer, the distant wail of sirens, all gone. All that remained was the sound of rain lashing against the windows. My first instinct was panic. A familiar cold dread washed over me. I hated the dark, the loss of control. But then I heard a noise from the living room. A soft thud, followed by a curse. "Julian." I called out, my voice thin in the oppressive quiet. "Yeah. I'm here. Just kicked the coffee table. You okay?" His voice was a comforting rumble in the blackness. "I'm fine," I wasn't, but it was the automatic response. A moment later, a small flame flickered to life, and his face was illuminated by the glow of a lighter. He found the emergency candles I kept in a kitchen drawer, the ones I'd bought years ago and never used. He lit several, placing them around the living room. The space was transformed. The harsh angles of the room softened, and the shadows danced, long and deep. The world shrank to the small, warm circle of our candlelight. He was still favoring his ankle, moving with a careful limp. He sank onto the couch with a sigh, the springs groaning under his weight. I sat in the armchair opposite him. The usual distractions were gone. No phones, no television, no laptops. There was nothing to do but exist in this small, quiet space together. The silence between us felt different this time. Not awkward, not tense. Expectant. "Never liked blackouts," he said, his voice low. He was staring into the flame of the candle on the coffee table. "Makes you feel cut off." "I know what you mean," I said, surprised at my own willingness to agree. "It's too quiet." Funny, he said with a small, humorless laugh. I usually crave quiet. My job is just noise. Saws, hammers, guys yelling. All day. I thought moving in here, with you, you're so quiet. I figured it'd be perfect. My stomach did a slow, nervous flip. He thought about me before moving in. I was worried I was too loud for you, he continued, still not looking at me. Dropping my boots. Slamming the door. I know I'm not subtle. I got used to it, I said, and it was true. The sounds of his existence were no longer an intrusion. They were a part of the apartment's soundscape. A sign that I wasn't alone. The thought was so surprising, so contrary to everything I believed about myself, that it left me momentarily breathless. He finally turned his head and looked at me, his eyes dark and serious in the flickering light. I was nervous, you know. Meeting you. You seemed so self-contained. Like you had this whole world figured out in your head, and I was just this big, clumsy oaf about to wreck it. I let out a short, sharp laugh that was more of a gasp. Me. Figured out. Julian, my entire life is a carefully managed crisis. The confession slipped out before I could stop it. The darkness made it easier. It was like speaking into a void. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Yeah. Me too. And just like that, the last wall between us crumbled into dust. We talked for hours. He told me about growing up in a small town, about his frustration with his father who wanted him to take over the family hardware store. He talked about moving to the city to prove he could build something for himself, with his own two hands. He talked about the loneliness of it, the feeling of being a stranger in a crowd of millions. I, in turn, told him about my own fears. About the social anxiety that felt like a physical weight, making it easier to hide behind a screen than to face the world. I told him about my work, the joy of creating something beautiful out of nothing, and the crushing pressure of constant deadlines and self-doubt. It was the most I had ever said to another human being at one time. The words poured out of me, a flood of pent-up thoughts and feelings. He just listened, his gaze never leaving my face, his expression one of rapt attention. The rain had softened to a gentle drumming on the roof. The candles had burned down, the wax pooling at their bases. A comfortable quiet settled between us again, but this time it was filled with everything we had just shared. Leo, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The sound of my name on his lips sent a shiver down my spine. He leaned forward, moving from the couch to kneel on the floor in front of my chair. The space between us was gone. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He was so close I could see the flicker of the candlelight reflected in his pupils. My heart was hammering, a wild, frantic rhythm against my ribs. This is it. The panic is here. But it was different. It was tangled with a desperate, aching want that drowned out the fear. For weeks, he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't decipher, I've been watching you. The way you get so lost in your work. The way you chew on your lip when you're concentrating. The way the light from your screen catches in your hair. My breath caught in my chest. He saw me. He had been seeing me all along. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before his fingers gently cupped my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, a feather-light touch that sent a cascade of sparks through my entire nervous system. His calloused skin was an anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. I think, he whispered, his eyes searching mine, I'm falling for you. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a demanding kiss. It was a question. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, testing the waters. I was frozen for a second, my mind screaming with a million conflicting signals. This is a mistake. This is terrifying. This is everything you've ever wanted. My body made the decision for me. I leaned into the kiss, my hand coming up to rest on his shoulder. I could feel the solid muscle beneath his shirt. The kiss deepened, and all the unspoken tension, all the longing and curiosity that had been building between us for months, poured into that single point of contact. It was slow, and honest, and it felt like coming home. I woke to the gray light of dawn filtering through the window. For a moment, I was disoriented, my body humming with a strange, unfamiliar warmth. Then the memories of the night before came rushing back. The blackout. The conversation. The kiss. Julian. A slow, stupid grin spread across my face. I felt light. The anxiety that usually sat like a stone in my stomach was gone, replaced by a fizzing, hopeful buoyancy. I stretched, my muscles feeling loose and relaxed for the first time in years. The rain had stopped. The only sound was the distant, muffled roar of the city waking up. I rolled over, expecting to see him there, expecting to meet his eyes and confirm that last night was real. The other side of the bed was empty. The sheets were cold. A knot of ice formed in my gut, instantly dissolving the warmth. I sat up, my heart starting to thump with a familiar, sickly rhythm. Maybe he was in the kitchen. I threw on a t-shirt and went to look. The apartment was silent. Deathly silent. A single coffee mug, his favorite chipped blue one, sat in the sink. But Julian was gone. The heavy thud of his boots was absent. The space he usually occupied, that vortex of sound and energy, was now a vacuum. A hollow, aching void. My mind, my worst enemy, kicked into high gear. The hopeful thoughts of moments before curdled into a toxic sludge of self-recrimination. He regretted it. Of course, he regretted it. He woke up, saw me lying there, and panicked. He fled. I was a mistake. A moment of darkness-induced madness. An experiment he now deeply regretted. The carefully managed fortress I called a life, which had felt so liberating to abandon last night, now seemed like a pathetic, flimsy ruin. And I was standing in the middle of it, completely exposed. The anxiety came back with a vengeance, a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I was an idiot. A naive, lonely idiot who had mistaken a moment of shared vulnerability for something real. I spent the day in a fugue state. I tried to work, but the lines on my screen swam before my eyes. Every creak of the floorboards in the hallway made me jump. Every siren in the distance sounded like him coming home, then faded, leaving the silence even heavier than before. The solitude I had once cultivated as a protective shield was now a torture chamber. The apartment had never felt so empty. His absence was a physical presence, a ghost sitting in his chair, a void in the air where his scent should have been. He came home late. I heard his key in the lock, the soft click of the door. My entire body went rigid. I sat on my bed, staring at my own door, my heart pounding in my ears. I waited for a knock. I waited for him to say something, anything. Instead, I heard his quiet footsteps go directly to his room. His door closed with a soft, final click. And that was it. Nothing. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. It was worse than an argument. It was an erasure. It was a confirmation of my deepest fear, that I was not worth a conversation. That what happened between us was so insignificant, so regrettable, that it was best to simply pretend it never existed. The hope that had bloomed in my chest withered and died, leaving behind a cold, bitter ash. I pulled my knees to my chest and stared into the darkness, feeling more alone than I ever had before. The next day was an exercise in exquisite agony. 24 hours of shared space and total silence. We were back to being ghosts, but now we were haunted by the memory of touch, the memory of confession. I heard him get up, shower, and leave before I even got out of bed. I worked mechanically, fueled by stale coffee and a growing sense of despair. I felt pathetic, waiting for a sign, a word, a look. It never came. He was avoiding me. It was deliberate and complete. When he came home that evening, I was in the kitchen, pretending to be absorbed in washing a single plate. He walked in, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge without a word, and walked out. He didn't look at me. It was like I was invisible. Or worse, like I was something contagious, something to be shunned. That was the breaking point. The pain was sharp and clean. It was better than the gnawing uncertainty. Fine. If he wanted to pretend it never happened, so could I. I would rebuild my walls, higher and thicker than before. I would go back to my routine. I would forget the feel of his lips, the sound of his voice in the dark, the impossible, fragile hope he had ignited in me. I would be safe again. And I would be alone. The thought was a cold comfort, like a gravestone. I was in my room that night, staring blankly at my tablet, trying to force myself to focus on a design, when I heard it. A soft, hesitant knock on my door. My blood turned to ice. For a wild moment, I considered not answering. Just pretending I was asleep. Let the silence win. But I couldn't. Some masochistic part of me needed to see this through to its painful conclusion. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. He was standing there, looking wrecked. The confident swagger was gone. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, and something else. Something that looked like fear. He was holding a worn, leather-bound sketchbook in his hands, clutching it like a shield. Can we talk?" he asked, his voice rough. I just nodded, my throat too tight for words, and stepped back to let him in. He walked into the center of my small room and stood there awkwardly, not knowing what to do with his large frame in my confined space. "I'm sorry," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "Leo, I am so sorry. For the last 2 days. For just disappearing." I found my voice, but it was brittle. "I figured you regretted it." No, the word was sharp, emphatic. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a raw, desperate honesty. "God, no. That's the problem. I didn't regret it. Not for a second. It's the only thing that's felt real to me in months." I stared at him, confused. "Then why?" He ran a hand through his already messy hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "Because it scared the hell out of me. What happened between us, it was too much. Too fast. I don't do this. I don't do feelings. Every time I've let someone in, I've messed it up. I break things, Leo. It's what I do. And you. I don't want to break you." His vulnerability was a physical blow. All my anger, all my hurt, just evaporated, replaced by a wave of bone-deep empathy. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself. From the terrifying possibility of happiness. In that moment, I felt a surge of courage I didn't know I possessed. The courage born of having nothing left to lose. "You think I'm not scared?" I asked, my voice shaking but clear. "Julian, I've spent my entire adult life building walls to keep people out. I perfected being alone. And then you came in and you were so loud, and you took up so much space, and you made me feel things I had worked so hard to numb. Waking up that morning, and you were gone, that was the most scared I've ever been. Not because of what happened, but because I thought I'd lost it. I thought I'd lost you." A tear escaped my eye and traced a hot path down my cheek. I angrily wiped it away. He took a step closer, his expression softening into one of profound tenderness. "You're not going to lose me," he said, his voice thick. "If you'll have me." He held out the sketchbook. I wanted to show you something." My hands trembled as I took it from him. I opened it to a random page. It was a pencil drawing. A sketch of my hands, resting on my keyboard, the details captured with breathtaking precision, the curve of my knuckles, the way I held my pen. I flipped the page. Another drawing. Me, asleep on the couch, my head thrown back, my mouth slightly open. It was unflattering and intimate and so incredibly real it made my chest ache. I kept turning the pages. There were dozens of them. Sketches of me at my desk, illuminated by the glow of the screen. Me in the kitchen, staring into the fridge. Me reading a book, my brow furrowed in concentration. He had been watching me, not with judgment, but with an artist's eye. With an intensity of focus that was a confession in itself. I finally landed on the last drawing. It was the most detailed of them all. It was me, from the night of the blackout, sitting in the armchair, my face illuminated by candlelight. He had captured the awe and the fear and the hope in my expression perfectly. He had captured a part of me I didn't even know was visible. "I see you, Leo," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I think I have from the very beginning." That was it. That was the symbolic gesture, more powerful than any flowery promise. It wasn't just an admission of his feelings, it was proof. Proof that while I was busy hiding, he was busy seeing. He saw past the walls, past the anxiety, and he had drawn the person underneath. I looked up from the book, my eyes blurry with tears, and I smiled. "I see you too," I said. And I stepped forward, closing the last inch of space between us, and kissed him. This time, there was no hesitation. No fear. There was only the solid, reassuring certainty of his arms wrapping around me, holding me tight, as if he never planned on letting go. The morning after was different. I woke up slowly, tangled in sheets that smelled like him, his arms slung heavily and possessively over my waist. The gray dawn light was the same, but everything else had changed. I turned my head, and he was there, his eyes already open, watching me. A slow, lazy smile spread across his face. "Morning," he rumbled, his voice still thick with sleep. "Morning," I whispered back, my own smile feeling wide and unfamiliar on my face. There was no anxiety. No second-guessing. Just a quiet, profound sense of rightness. The stone in my stomach had been replaced by a warm, steady glow. Our new life began to take shape in small, domestic moments. We made coffee together, our bodies moving in a comfortable, easy dance in the small kitchen, his hip brushing against mine as he reached for the sugar. His tools, once a symbol of his intrusion, now sat on a shelf he'd built for me, a sign of our shared space. His heavy boots by the door were no longer a disruption, but a promise that he would be coming home. The silences returned, but they were a different species entirely. We could sit in the same room for hours, me working on a design, him cleaning a piece of his motorcycle engine on a tarp in the corner, and the quiet was a comfort. It was a shared peace, a testament to the fact that we no longer needed words to fill the space between us. We could just be together. One rainy Sunday, we were lying on the couch, my head on his chest, the steady, strong beat of his heart a rhythm beneath my ear. His sketchbook was open on the floor, filled now with new drawings, of us, together. I thought back to the man I was 6 months ago. The man who lived in a fortress of his own making, who mistook solitude for safety and routine for peace. My life had been a flat, grayscale landscape. Julian had crashed into it, all noise and color and chaos, and had shaken my world to its foundations. He wasn't just a roommate, he was a plot twist I never saw coming. He was the disruption that had saved me from my own carefully constructed prison. He shifted beneath me, his fingers tracing lazy circles on my back. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. I tilted my head back to look at him, at the men who saw me when I thought I was invisible. "Just that I used to think this apartment was my home," I said, a wave of gratitude so strong it almost hurt washing over me. But I was wrong. I settled back down, tucking my head under his chin, feeling the warmth of his skin, the strength of his arms around me. "You are